Alright, firstly, we've got a few copies from the developer to give away, so thanks to them for sponsoring the episode. This one's going to be awesome. In terms of layout, we're going to talk very briefly about the story, with absolutely no spoilers, just the setup. Then we'll talk about how the DLC plays out and how you can access it. And then finally, we're going to go over to the developers for their thoughts and just generally why they did this for the community. It is pretty damn sweet. Oh, and I also asked them what was coming next. Well, Baldo isn't quite done with people just yet. In fact, they've created another massive free update. So perhaps I was a little premature when I said that it was a full redemption arc in the last video. I'd say that comes, well, now. If you've not played their Zelda and Ghibli inspired action RPG, hopefully this one will tell you why now Baldo is complete and exactly what that includes. Well, my name's Mark Walker, welcome back to Switch Up. Now, let's find out. Well, here we are again, visiting a game that came out in such an interesting state that people had so many different things to say about it, but which now has quite a dedicated following due to the amount of free content, updates and work that the team have put into it. Now, Nap's team who created this are an Italian studio that have been around for 30 years, and in fact I believe they're the oldest Italian studio. They worked on some of my favourites from back in the day on Amiga, and is based in Messina, Sicily, founded by Fabio Capone and Domenico Barba. So originally we had Baldo and the Guardian Owls, which featured around about a 50-hour long campaign. It had dungeons, it had an overworld featuring lots of different characters, including a dancing and singing frog, and it was designed to be difficult. What I mean by that is the dungeons themselves often had multiple routes through them. You might find one key and actually there were 3 doors, and having chatted to the developers, it was incredibly difficult to design it in that way. It would have been much more simplistic to have a very linear pathway through each of them. What this does mean though, and what it still means to this day, especially as we're going to see, is that it's a difficult game at times, even when you're presented with a relatively small environment. Now, following the Guardian Owls, we had the 3 fairies, and then the Elemental Temple. Both of those took place before that game, so the content there didn't spoil it, it only added to the overall lore of the world. And these weren't small expansions, you were looking at 10 hours plus of extra content, not to mention they took on criticism from the community, I might have been one of them, and they tweaked and refined the way combat played out. Now, this update is the final update, as the title suggests, in the final chapter, and I will remain spoiler-free as much as possible other than the location, and that is where Baldo wakes up in the classroom to find himself in the middle of a lesson, and as the player you have no idea exactly what's going on, whether it's a swan song style ending, or if something a little more sinister's going on. Now, the school itself is split over 4 different floors, with a roof area that you can also access, but the whole thing is a maze. There are multiple different routes that you can find, hidden corridors, staircases hidden behind bookshelves, and in its entirety it almost acts like an amalgamation of all the different types of mazes and dungeons we had in the first game, rolled into one coherent and not too large package. But as I mentioned at the start, you'll still find yourself getting lost. Now, it starts out relatively easy. You'll have a few simple requests, and as before, these will be logged in your quest log before you start walking around the corridors. This time around, there's an emphasis on talking to the NPCs. They'll give you loads of little clues. There are a lot of nostalgic references as well. Most of us spent a good chunk of time in schools at some point or other, but the team have managed to create puzzles in there that feel completely natural. One example is the gymnasium. There are large mirrors all down the side, and as soon as you walk in, you notice that there's a book in there that you can't actually see in the real world, and some symbols on the floor. Now, solving that puzzle, I'm not going to lie, it took me far longer than it should have done, but everything will have you running from one side of the building to the other, and to facilitate that, you've got this slip of paper which basically gives you the different floor layouts. You do also have a map, but you won't be able to see the names of the rooms, so that slip is essential. The final chapter starts out a little bit more like an old school adventure game, fetching certain items, and there's still some environmental puzzling so that you can unlock some of those keys to get into further areas, but it's a much more cerebral start. Now, having said that, that's not to say that there isn't combat, but you'll once again need to use your head. If you're stuck in a room and you've got absolutely no weapons, then you've got to grab whatever you can to fight off these rats. And in its around about 5-hour runtime, there is a dramatic shift. Let's just say that. That's all I'm going to say in terms of spoilers. There's a dramatic shift, and you may see some more traditional combat in there. It's just very well done. Sometimes these things can feel a little bit tacked on, but that's not the case here. And I have to keep reminding myself that the whole thing's completely free for anyone who owns the game. So let's look at the developers then, and what they have to say about it. So they describe this as taking place after the battle with Naroko, and it's the ending that they always envisaged, but there was just no time to get this part finished. And in actual fact, when you look back at the 2020 trailer, you can actually see Baldo and Luna embracing in this alternative world. Nap's team were keen to give the fans the ending that they wanted, because the original clearly didn't have quite the finish that they planned. And when he wakes up in this school environment, Baldo remembers nothing from his previous life, and everything seems completely normal. We divided the school up into 3 different floors, including the yard, the pool and the roof, and we were really keen that this last chapter wasn't just a walk in the park. This time, kind of as I mentioned at the start, the order that you choose to attack the dungeon will change the way it plays out. If you were to go into this without having played the original game and even some of the expansions to some degree, as we saw a shuffling dungeon in one of those, you would probably be a bit overawed. Don't expect to have your hand held, although having said that, you've got your list of different tasks you need to do, and as far as quality of life, you've got the map and the locations of the different rooms. It's also worth noting though that this has lots of references to the base game. The things that you expect that we've put in there are things like secrets, hidden paths, clues, fights, puzzles. It's how we designed it as a gift essentially for Baldo fans. He finishes by saying it's an act of love to the many fans who've supported us over the years during this long adventure. After the release of the magnificent Tears of the Kingdom, I guess Baldo could be the last adventure game nowadays with intricate and complex dungeons, old school Zelda style. Baldo's aim was always the journey in a world that felt full of life with interesting characters. That sense of discovery and loss, the path of a kid on something bigger than himself, the path of a kid on a journey bigger than himself. And hopefully if you played the original, you may have noticed that we tried to put in things that can actually be experienced. If you saw a house, then you could go and explore it. So if you've got the game, jump back in, and thanks for supporting Baldo. If you're interested in picking it up, there is a 30% sale to time with this video that goes on until November the 15th, taking it down to £15.74, which is a ridiculous price for something that's now around 70 to 75 hours long, from a very small team, and in my opinion it deserves our support. Remember, there is that physical version as well, if you're able to get your hands on it. I did ask them what's coming next for their team and what they're planning on developing next, and let's just say it's going to be something big. Thanks to all of you that enjoy the content, to our Patreons and members, and as always for all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!